Thank you so much for joining the Dr. Whisperer podcast show. I am your host, Sharon Feckety, and you are here to listen to others talk about the business of medicine. Don't forget to subscribe, share it with somebody else that is in the business of medicine so we can all learn together. Thank you for being here and enjoy the show. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm very happy to have Dr. Bradley Block here today. He is in a private practice, an otolaryngologist from Long Island, New York, where I am from. So I'm very happy. I learned how to say otolaryngology out the gate working in medical 25 years ago. That and, just a few other neurological, like radiculopathy. Try to say things that make me sound smart, but, not
some
so
people
smart.
get the G wrong, like a soft G, like otolaryngology. That's where they get hung up a little bit. But yeah, otolaryngology, you got it. Or some people, if they want to get fancy, otorhinolaryngology. So you can't forget about the nose.
I like it. Yeah. All right. Well, Dr. Block, welcome to the show.
Brad, please. Only my parents call me Dr. Block.
Well, they paid for med school.
They helped.
Thank God for mom and dad.
Yeah.
So I am very excited because, I was just witnessing the Long Island medium, somebody you didn't want to talk about on the show, but she was fantastic last night. And I got to have a little piece of Long Island. So I'm so happy since 2018 having this show. It's very rare that I get somebody from Long Island coming on. And I feel a connection immediately. Like
I never thought I'd end up back practicing right next to the Roosevelt Field Mall, but there I am.
That's music to my ears. The Roosevelt Field Mall, the place where, we went when we had nothing better to do. And now there's Amazon. So
don't even have to leave our house anymore. Yeah. Right.
So I will tell the audience first and foremost that you are not just, a physician, a surgeon. You are also a podcast host. Mm-hmm. And I was listening to your podcast, which is Physician's Guide to Doctoring. I went right to the episode where you were interviewing a doctor that started his own practice, because that's what I like to do. I like to help docs start their own practices. And I wanted to hear his feedback, and I had some things I didn't agree with. So,
interesting.
Yeah. So I'd like to break it down. He was lovely man. But as soon as I heard that there was a wife running the practice, I was like, OMG. So let's talk about you, and let's talk about the practice that you're in first and foremost, because ENT, otolaryngology, is super important. You're in Garden City, correct?
Yes. But my practice we're the largest ENT practice in the country. And if anyone listening is in otolaryngology or knows about otolaryngology, they know who we are, because we are currently 250 physicians between the ENTs and the allergists. We've got 50 offices across New York and New Jersey, and we are that big New York, New Jersey practice. And the thing that makes us different is we're physician run. We have an elected board of physicians. These are physicians that don't spend all of their time running their practice. They're seeing patients just like we are. So if there's a pain point for them, if there's a pain point for us, it's a pain point for them. And if we feel like they're not steering the ship well, they don't get reelected, right? And so they don't get mired in the day-to-day. We have, we have a C-suite for that runs the practice, but they are effectively the arm of the board. And if things aren't being run well, then they need to change. So, so we are physician-owned and physician-run, which really makes us, because of our size, makes us different. You don't have many large practices that are still owned by the physicians. And the thing that really makes us different, full equity partnership. So everyone who's a partner has, if you join us at a residency and you do, all the things that you need to do in order to become a partner, you become a partner. And you have just as much equity as me, who's been in the practice for almost 12 years, or some of the more senior doctors who've been in the practice for, 25 years. Everyone's got the same equity.
So many things I want to ask you. So a lot of, as you were having this discussion with the doctor, his name, I'll put it in the show notes.
Brian Gantworker, neurosurgery out in LA. Yes.
Nice.
And his brother, Eric Gantworker, is actually an otolaryngologist near me. That's how we got connected.
Love it. But you mentioned like most doctors, when they come out of med school, are not opening their own practice, right? It's just not. You are in what I like to call like a super mecca efficient organization because you get to see patients. And I think that the biggest hurdle that physicians that I have worked with, that have hired me to represent them, to do PR, whatever it is, the thing that is almost the saddest is that they don't get to do what they love. They thought that going into business was going to be just getting to see patients, but then they have to do all of the other things. They have to think about who they're going to hire. They have to think about renting, owning, getting a loan, who is going to be a partner, who's not going to be a partner. So I love that you're in this, wonderful, huge group, the largest in the country. I think that is when you can go see a physician and know that he might actually be happy because he doesn't have to worry about all the other stuff.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's a nice mix of the two where you get the mental freedom to be able to see patients without worrying about, is the rent going to be paid? Is my staff going to be paid? Does everyone have benefits? I just lost someone just quit. We're going to need to replace them, right? Like it's not that monologue isn't running in the back of my head as I'm seeing patients because we have people that can take care of it. But at the same time, we're not working for people who aren't physicians, who don't understand what we go through every day with patients, right? They don't understand the responsibility we have, the challenges we have. And so, that sometimes the administrators get rather distanced from what it's like to be a physician and end up putting, more responsibilities on us, more tasks on us. The EMR gets built up in a certain way that serves more billing rather than patient care. Whereas when you have physicians that are running that, it's different. It's different. And when you're, as you said, when you're putting up a shingle, right? Like you're a solo practitioner, you're starting your own practice. There's a lot there, but at the same time, it's doable. All those skills are learnable. And I don't want to dissuade other physicians from joining, from doing that, unless of course they're an otolaryngologist, in which case then there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Just join us.
There you go. Just moved to New York. Yeah. So I was director of operations for New York Medical before I moved here 18 years ago. And we had 11 offices and 42 satellite offices. So I love nothing more than the large practice. It does become it's a little stressful, but when it is run properly and you have the right people in place, then you're golden and you get to do what you love. So one of the things that I really enjoyed in your bio and understanding more about what you do and your podcast is that ultimately, you realize that the rapport was the key to gaining trust. And what I tell people is, if I'm going to help doctors in business, it's ultimately to help the patient, right? Because if the physician is happy, if the practice manager is happy, if everybody in there is happy and they have happy people that they're hiring, who gets the best benefit? Well, the patient. So why don't you talk to me a little bit about that rapport?
Well, so one of the things that when I first joined my practice is I saw that some of my partners were much more efficient about seeing patients than I was. They were able to see many more an hour, able to run on time. I mean, there are certainly challenges for all of us in running on time. Some people are more complicated. Some people show up late, right? Like some people want to be squeezed in. So that's always going to be a challenge, but still some people are more efficient at it than others. And I found that there are people out there with expertise in human communication, right? Like sometimes it's called social engineering, although I think that's more used now for like, stealing someone's identity. So if you Google social engineering, that's what it's going to show. But really you're trying to engineer this interaction between the doctor and the patient. And there are ways to do it well, and there are ways to do it poorly, and there are ways to do it efficiently and still have the patient be satisfied with the visit. And so there are a lot of experts out there, and a lot of them are focusing their attention on like dating or sales or, business executives. And they're not focused on doctor-patient communication, but there are lessons to be learned from that, with like, for instance, there's this thing that I like to call the question behind the question, where the patient has a question, but they're not verbalizing it. They'll come in, especially for ENT. I feel like I have something stuck in my throat. I feel like I have a lump in my throat. And we're like, it's reflux, it's postnasal drip, it's, maybe it's anxiety, maybe there is something in their throat. But what they're really mostly asking is, do I have throat cancer? Unless you tell them during that visit, they do not have throat cancer. I took a good look down there. We saw everything in the area. There are no tumors. There's no throat cancer. So unless you verbalize it, they're going to be leaving wondering, did the doctor evaluate me for throat cancer? Could I have throat cancer? Or they'll kind of perseverate on their symptoms and not really ask the question, but really that's what they're not going to leave until they get that question answered. So they might not even verbalize it. So sometimes you can, when you realize that, the patient's more fulfilled and the visit goes faster. And then you don't run behind because you've recognized what the question behind the question is. And a good way to get that out with patients is, what bothers you about this? What's worrying you about this? What's concerning you about this? Like, ask that one question and it can really help smooth out a lot of the bumps in the road. So there are ways to engineer the visit, way to ask certain questions, way to read the room, or even to have your own nonverbal cues in such a way that it gives the patient more confidence that you're an authority figure and actually interested in helping them. So there's a lot that we can learn and then implement in our own practice.
I love it. So there are two things that I really want to get to as well. One of them being your entryway into the podcast world. I think that's fantastic. I think more physicians should be hosting podcasts. So kudos to you.
I disagree.
Why?
I don't need the competition. I'd rather be the only physician out there.
Well,
and
you're
then everyone
not.
listens to me. Yeah, no. So I don't know. I don't want anyone else starting a podcast so that everyone can just listen to me.
Oh, wow. Well, we believe in collaboration here at the Doctor Whisperer. So I say bring on the doctors and nurse practitioners and PAs, because I do believe that education is the absolute best way. Because, I have the great understanding of, I've never had any desire to understand anything clinical. My father worked at New York Hospital. My mother worked at Mercy Hospital and South Nassau Hospital. And I get nauseous thinking about the sight of blood. My mother took me in as what do they call them? The candy stripe girl as a teenager. I saw blood, I passed out. Okay. So I got into the business of medicine at a very young age, and I have really loved it, but I have been able to see what it is like to have that stress, to have back in that, I don't even know y'all still using beepers, but the beepers were going off, right? The late night call, the not getting to go see the kids when they're doing their first play, going to the funerals. I mean, there's so much that people don't know, that patients don't understand. And what I always find funny is when they think that like, you guys are just rolling in the dough, when they don't understand what goes on with insurance companies and how difficult it is to get on a panel and how little money you are actually reimbursed for the services that you provide. So I know this.
And that we don't just think of them when they're in the exam room. We take this stuff home. We think about them. We worry about them.
Yeah.
And they sometimes don't realize that. I think they often don't realize that we generally, it's not just for the income that we're doing this. We're doing it, one, because we enjoy it, and two, because we want to help and we have genuine concern for their well-being.
Right. All right. So we'll go to the podcast first, and I want to talk about nepotism next. Okay. I don't want to forget.
Nepotism. Okay.
Nepotism.
So
all right. So why did you get into podcasting? Tell me about, what was that decision? Did you meet with all the partners and say, hey, I'm going to jump out, I'm going to do a podcast show? I think it would be good. Tell me the story.
No, the podcast has nothing to do with my practice. Nothing to do with ENT and Allergy Associates, which is my practice. It is a completely separate venture. I got kind of permission for it first.
Right. That's what I meant.
So they
you
wanted
had to tell them.
Yeah, they
Right.
wanted to listen to some episodes and make sure I wasn't going off the rails and was going to be some liability.
Right.
So yeah, that, I need some permission. But initially it was really all about that doctor-patient communication, that I wanted to gain access to experts outside of my circle. And the great thing about podcasting, as is you can reach out to strangers and be like, hey,
Yeah.
I've got some questions for you. Would you like to come on my show? And a lot of times they're like, sure. So you can reach out to people who are strangers. And, one of my favorite experiences as a podcaster was at the very beginning.
Which
there was
was
an
when?
article.
When did you start?
Like 5 years ago now.
Nice.
Yeah. I'm something like 250 episodes in, 5 years. It's a once a week episode. Maybe I'll be turning that up soon. And so I had read in, I think it was Huffington Post, there was an article really lambasting physicians. We don't know how to talk to patients about their weight. And that's something that we don't have any training in medicine, right? Like how to do it effectively, because it's such a triggering experience to interface with the healthcare profession for someone who's struggled with their weight. And, it seems like anytime they go to the doctor, it's like the doctor brings it up, and it doesn't even matter what they're there for. So there was this article that's just lambasting the profession for not being able to talk to patients. So I contacted one of the psychologists that was quoted in the article and say, hey, I saw this article. Can you teach us how to do it better? And so we did an episode together, and a couple of years later, I had her back on the show again. And so now for me, I'm better at it. My listeners are better at it. And hopefully the listeners are then going on to teach their trainees about it, so that we can all be better about that one, particular conversation that really, it's an important conversation to have or not have, right? You gotta decide when is the right time to have the conversation. Often the answer is not now, another time.
Well, yes, very sensitive. And I will just share, I went to my ENT because in the pandemic, I started snoring and I had gained weight. And I went to this ENT who I really love. And almost the second thing that she said to me was, do you want to get started on this weight loss plan? And she gave me a form, which was actually, it was funny because there was a line going through the middle of it, which reminded me like so much of how many copies must have gone through. It was just a bad form. But she was absolutely right. It
She had a ditto machine in the back.
It was bad, man. Yeah. It was bad. And it was like, do you have a fax machine? Oh my God. Wow. 2023, we're still asking that question in the medical industry, but she was right. But I think that's great. No, that's one of the things.
But there's a way to say it. There's a way to say it.
Of course.
And then there's every other way, which is not how to say it. Yeah.
Right. Okay. The other thing I want to ask. So congratulations on the podcast.
Thank you.
I encourage everybody to listen. I think that the more that we know, the better. I love that you are open to learning and teaching and sharing. And we get to have, more than a soundbite that most doctors get on the local news or just writing a blog that not a lot of people get to see. And this world of, information and social media, we're hoping that we get some really great experts, right, to give these great insights. So the last thing I want to talk about is my issue with nepotism in the workplace, especially in the medical industry. And I ran a pediatric practice before I went out on my own 10 years ago here in Tampa Bay, Florida. And I wrote a book with a doctor, and my chapter was nepotism in the workplace, because there were so many wives and cousins and neighbors that were involved in the practice that I came to. And I came from a place that was more like what your big ENT practice is, right? It's physicians, very, very involved in the business, but they had CEO, they had a CFO, they had a compliance officer, all the things. So the doctors got to see patients. But here it was like, everybody's involved. So when I was listening to that episode previously, and I heard about the wife in the practice, and listen, I'm sure she's lovely, and maybe they're the one in a million that I have worked with, which has never been a great idea, because I have wives, mothers, mother-in-laws, cousins, and neighbors. And I understand that because of all of the fraud and all of the money laundering that goes on in the medical industry from the office manager that is related, that is, the cousin in Iowa that is running the practice that used to run a hair salon, I'm always so curious as to why we think it's actually a good idea. I will give you my thoughts on why I don't think it's a good idea, but I would love to hear from your perspective what you think is going on with hiring so many relatives in these medical practices. Every doctor listening or watching knows that your traditional insurance only goes so far. Your malpractice only goes so far. So there's real risks that can actually keep you up at night. You know that. I know that. I've watched you stressed out the next day from all of these insurance issues. Well, SRA 831B admin helps you mitigate these risks and lower your tax liability by putting money into a vehicle that is tax advantage to self-insure risks that fall out of your traditional property and casualty insurance. I would not have them as a sponsor if I did not believe 100% that they can actually help you. So to find out more information, please check out the website that is in the show notes. Contact them today. I promise you won't regret it.
Well, I think in this particular instance, it was husband and wife going to a new city together to start a new business together. The husband brings one skill set, the wife brings another skill set. They work together and they can run the practice together. And I think in this particular instance, it works for them. When it starts to become an issue, in my perspective, is if you're looking to hire partners, is if you're looking to expand and hire other physicians into your practice, because then that's where the conflict comes in. If you want to run the business with your significant other, great. But if you're trying to hire someone, I would want whoever's being hired to be really leery of that situation, because you're stepping into a hornet's nest here, because there's also, there's their business relationship, there's their personal relationship, and now you're becoming a throuple, right? Mm-hmm. There are going to be a lot of landmines there. And so I think that's really the problem. If it's just going to stay that, husband and wife running the business together, taking on the world, great. But if you're not part of that couple and you're considering joining that practice, you need to be wary of those relationships.
Well, that is 100% true. But I also want people to think about, because this is about the business of medicine, this show in particular. If you are ever thinking about having an employee, know that that employee is never going to trust the administrator that is related to the doctor. So yes, very true about partners. I've been in places where the husband was the IT guy and the wife was the marketing director, and the partners were just fighting all the time. So I think that is really great feedback. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. So something that I started in my practice is something called the Patient Experience Committee. And that's because I want to make sure that the reason I started the committee is for the staff, because I want to make sure the staff is as satisfied as possible. And a lot of the initiatives that we're creating from that committee it's more about the staff experience committee, because if the staff is satisfied, then the patients are satisfied. But if, part of that committee is giving the staff a platform to make suggestions. And as you pointed out, if they don't feel like there's a safe space here because there's a domestic relationship between the office manager and the physician, they're not going to feel like they can speak freely to the office manager about suggestions, or vice versa to the physician about the office manager. And so we need our staff to be able to speak freely about ways that we can improve our practice. And to what you just said, like that's not going to happen in that situation.
So I lied. I have another question. It comes down to hospitality and healthcare. So I've done many, many videos about, and I teach hospitality and healthcare, and I've spoken at conferences about hospitality and healthcare because of this one person in particular. And I don't know if you know her, but her name is Miserable Mary. And miserable Mary is the one that answers the phones or greets the patient when they come in, or maybe it's somebody that's doing a referral. Certainly never, you would hope, the practice administrator, because I do think a big piece of their job is good PR. And I have seen many, many businesses really fail from the people that they have working inside. It's usually never the doctor, quite honestly. Like, usually the doctor's great, he's got a good rapport and the patients like him, but it's getting to that doctor that tends to be an issue. So what are your thoughts about hospitality and healthcare, and how do you weave that into your practice or encourage others to weave it into theirs?
I would push back on the fact that usually the doctor is great and the staff is the issue. I would say the physicians, the owners of the practice, the managers really need to be invested, excuse me, in their staff. And that's how you end up with a better product. I want the physicians to know all of their staff members' names, all of their family members' names. I want them to know about their staff, and I want them to care about their staff. And when that happens, the staff feels more invested. They feel like the practice managers and the physicians care about them, and they're going to deliver a better product because they're going to care more about the practice. So I think it's really important, if you're going to try and optimize the patient experience, to really care about your staff. Listen to your staff. They're on the front lines dealing with angry patients. They're going to have suggestions. I know one thing that I do in my practice is, patients show up late. Patients want to be squeezed in. Patients, they want this perfect situation that can't exist, where they can show up late, but they're also being seen on time, and they can be squeezed in. And, it's a paradox. You can't have all of those things happening at the same time. And so I rely on my staff for when I should be. Do you think that I should still see this patient? Is it going to really hose us for the rest of the day? Because if it does, you're the one that's going to be yelled at by all those patients who are now being made to wait by this one patient who ran late. So, they're the ones that are going to give you feedback about how the practice can be run more efficiently. They're going to have great suggestions. And so that's what my committee is a lot about, is creating a safe platform for different people within the practice to make these suggestions to help the practice run better. So, if you want that positive patient experience, know your staff, care about your staff, and listen to their suggestions, because if they feel like they have a voice, they're also going to be more invested in the workplace.
Rare. But yes, I'm with you. And of course, there are a lot of doctors that are just straight up assholes that don't say good morning or hello or goodbye. I mean, that's just a fact.
In the exam room with their patients, they're fine. Yeah. But they're what was your term? Miserable Mary. They're a miserable real. Mary or miserable Mark or miserable, whatever, until they get into the exam room, and then, they turned it up. And that's another thing that's fine. One of my suggestions when I teach medical students is there's some theater to medicine. And so, you should turn up your personality when you're in the exam room with the patients. So, they feel like you're really engaged and you're really there with them. So, turn things up a little bit, and that's fine, but it doesn't mean be a grump.
Oh my God, just be nice, yeah, be nice and be kind. I mean, if patients were nicer to miserable Mary, maybe she wouldn't be so miserable. So it is a very difficult, it's difficult because I find that most people don't complain actually about the doctors. They complain about the staff. And there is a lot to be said about then how the doctors are treating the staff members, but we also have to hire better. One thing I agreed very strongly with in that interview was we in the medical world, sometimes, cheaper seems to be the way to go. But if you want to get great people, you have to actually spend the money to do that.
Spend the money, spend the time investing them.
Yes.
And something that I've heard before is, well, if I spend all this time and effort training them, what if they leave? And the answer to that is, what if they don't?
Well, good.
So
Let
so
them
you
go.
really do want to spend a lot of time and effort training your staff and hiring the best people. And you can train them in whatever skills you want to train them in, but you can't train their personality. So you really want to hire for, you want someone who's hungry, who's personable, who's looking to get elevated within the practice. And then you can train them for all the skills that they need, but you can't train
Yes.
personality.
That is 100% true. So how many women docs do you have in your practice?
That's an excellent question. I
Thank you.
don't know.
Ah,
I don't know how many, like we have 250 doctors and they're constantly,
20?
they're doctors.
More than 20?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I always want to put a little push in for my women docs out there.
Yeah. I mean, when I trained in residency, it was the women always outnumbered the men in my training. The thing is, this is a relatively new phenomenon. And so, if you look at the doctors that have been in practice for 25 years, most of them are men. If you look at the doctors that have been in practice for like 10 years or fewer, we have many more women. So it's hard for the women to outnumber the men when the old guard is much more male dominated. The newer guard is not. And my specialty, and it was one in particular, I think that's, tends, at least in my experience, tends to be a lot more female, not dominated, but maybe like 55-45.
Mm-hmm. You have audiologists in the group as well?
We do. Last I heard, we were the largest employer of audiologists outside the VA. So we employ lots of audiologists.
I love it. All right. Well, I know that you're also available as a keynote speaker and improving the patient experience. And I think that anybody, especially a physician that wants to improve the patient experience, I say hire this man. Get him up there.
And if you want, check out the podcast.
Please check out the podcast.
Sorry, I'm gonna plug it here. The podcast. The tagline is everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. So, we memorize a lot of useless stuff in our training that we're never going to use, and there's a lot of stuff out there that you talk about, like, marketing and staff management and hiring and all of these things that are important to running a practice. Even if you're, an employed physician, you have staff and you should be involved in the hiring and the management of that staff. Because as you were saying, you want them to be delivering the best care possible. Yes.
Should they really?
Yes. Yes.
No.
Yes.
No. Okay. All right. Really? Hold up. So, as somebody who has been hiring and recruiting for 20 plus years, my nightmare is to have my doctors want to be involved in the hiring process because they have brought me on as an expert to do the hiring. Now, of course, before I go, we're going to have the employment offer right here. I'm going to need you to meet miserable Mary. I'm just kidding. I'm going to need you to meet this employee or this nurse practitioner, and especially if they're clinicians, 100% yes. But the administrative staff, I want my doctors to do what they do best, and that's to see patients. And I want them to trust me enough to take care of everything else.
Okay. I'm going to
when I say me, I mean, I ain't doing this shit anymore. I did that stuff. This is 10 years later. And I wouldn't want to be in that position anymore because it's a very tough position. And I think that when we understand the professionals and we bring them on to do their best work, that we trust them to do that. That is definitely one of the biggest broken chains, I feel like, in medicine, is that if then they bring the practice manager, the administrator, whoever it is, bring somebody on that they think is great, doctor comes in, meets them and says that they don't like that they have tattoos on their arms, we're going to have a problem.
Right. So the physicians should be educated on what to look for when you're hiring people, but especially if it's someone that they're going to be interacting with regularly.
Yeah, if they're working with them.
They're working with them. If it's someone in the billing department that they're never going to be interacting with, other than getting like, this modifier might need to be changed to that modifier, then fine, and they might not even be interested in getting involved in the process. But like knowing how to hire is a learnable skill that I think physicians do hard things. We do hard things.
The hardest things.
And it doesn't mean that there are other hard things that we can't learn as well. Now, you want to recognize what your strengths are and then hire to shore up your weaknesses. So if you're someone who really isn't very good at reading people, then maybe you shouldn't be involved in the hiring process. But it's that knowing what to look for and how to look for it is a learnable skill. And if the physician is interested in learning that, they can, and then they should be more involved in the hiring process. So just because we haven't learned it in our medical training doesn't mean we can't learn it.
Right. And that's the key, though. The doctors would have had to learn that for me to want them to be involved in it. I would say most of them aren't going to think that they need to learn much more. Let's just be real. I mean, I know because I've done this for a living and I'm a consultant in practices. So I think sometimes I'm with you. Like I love if and when the doctors want to be involved, great. But if you have great people running your business, you should do the thing that you're best at, which is seeing the patients. When I get the doctors involved, I'm just thinking of a neurosurgeon right now. And I got this unbelievable person for this unbelievably low price because this doctor didn't want to spend the money, you see. And as soon as they found out that this person didn't have a master's degree, they didn't want them. And I thought, well, that is the dumbest shit I've ever heard. So there is a lot, listen, we're talking about a wide spectrum, right? Yes. You have the biggest practice. You have a CEO, you have a CFO, you have a great interest in being a part of the business. You have partners that want to do that they want to learn. It's just not always the case.
No. Some people just want to put their head down and see their patients and want to outsource everything else. And that's what they want to do. But I'm just saying that physicians can learn these things if they're so interested. And if they're not, outsource. For instance, for me in my podcast, I don't edit my podcast. I outsource that. I have zero interest in learning how to edit my podcast. And my time is much better spent, to your point, seeing patients, because that's how I get revenue. And so I will never edit my podcast so yes, outsource to people that have the skills to do things that you can't do or don't want to do or know that you're not good at.
Right. I love this two New Yorkers thing going at it. There's not a lot of times where people were like, I disagree. I love that. Let's disagree more, because then we get to formulate opinions and we get to learn more. And I feel like I have learned a lot more just listening to you today. I would highly encourage everybody to listen to your podcast. We will have the link in the show notes along with, is it a hashtag that you said your tagline is or no?
No, it's not. It's just the tagline. It's just a summary of what the show covers, which is really everything. It's like the Swiss Army knife of physician podcasts. And
do you only bring on doctors?
No.
Fantastic.
No,
Sign me up.
All different, absolutely. All different areas of expertise, economists and, people, public speakers and an expert in nonverbal communication and lots, not just physicians. Absolutely not.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I miss New York. I miss the people like you in New York that are like really opinionated and are go-getters. I'm down with that. Not the same here in Tampa Bay, Florida. Not to say I don't love my Tampa Bay peeps, but it's just a little different. So thank you for being on the show.
You live in a vacation setting.
I live
right.
In a
you step outside and it feels like vacation. That's got to be
gorgeous.
That's got to be nice. I step outside. It feels like work. That's what New York is. New York is work. Tampa Bay.
That's why I left.
That sounds nice. Yeah.
It is beautiful, except maybe some of the politics. But with that, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Don't forget to mitigate risk. Visit 831b.com for more information.